Hi, and welcome back to the WI Cookery School, where we're learning how to make a cheese loaf. I've shown you how to make a basic white dough, and the link is on the screen for that if you want to learn how to make that. Once you've made the dough, it will be left to prove, and it will rise till it's double in size. And I have here my 500 grams of dough that has doubled in size, and I'm going to remove this from the bowl, and we're going to knock out all the air that we've actually allowed to grow in there. And to knock it back, just really pull in all the edges and really knead back down the dough, and you'll feel the air bubbles popping underneath. Now this dough rose in the fridge overnight, so this dough is actually quite cold, and that's absolutely fine because dough loves being cold while it's growing. It develops a fantastic flavour, so the cooler the better for it actually to grow, and then it just goes in a hot oven to bake. So there we are, we've knocked that back, and there's our lovely dough. So what we're now going to do is add in the ingredients. So on the first rise of making a dough, you just make the dough with its flour, water, yeast and salt, and then you add the ingredients for the second rise, because anything you add will prohibit yeast growth. So it's very important to make sure you add that on the second rise. So press down your dough, and you can be quite firm with it. And then into that we're going to add some lovely fresh herbs. So I've got here some fresh parsley, some basil and some oregano, some of which have been grown in the gardens here at Denman, which is nice fresh herbs from our gardens. And then some cheese, and I've got some parmesan. So parmesan gives a really lovely flavour, and then a little bit of cheddar also to give flavour, but you don't need masses. So use a strong cheddar, and then you need less of it to gain the flavour. So now you can see I've put in the cheese and the herbs, and then I'm going to pull this together. So use whatever herbs you've got. If you don't have any fresh herbs, by all means use dried herbs. Some chives are really nice as well. So pull it all together, and can you see now I've wrapped it all up. So now what I'm going to do is knead this dough and really work this through, and you'll see as I'm doing this, it will spread the herbs, it knocks back my dough, so I'll get a really great structure, and any minute now you'll see them start to fall out. You can see them just starting to poke out, and that's exactly what should happen, so don't worry. And keep kneading until you've distributed them really evenly throughout your dough. Once they're distributed, we're then going to shape our dough, and we're going to bake this in a traditional loaf tin. If I just wanted to make a plain white bread, by the way, I could just do this without any herbs at all and bake it in the tin. So, can you see there how that's really worked its way through? And we're now going to shape it. So you could do it like a cottage cob. Just do it like a cob on a tin like that, absolutely fine. But we're going to make it in actually a loaf tin. So I've got my tin here. I suggest you put a small amount of oil. Now, when you're using oil for greasing tins, please don't use a virgin olive oil because it burns at a low temperature and it will actually cause it to stick. It burns a layer around the tin. So a blended oil is fine. So just gently grease it with a little bit of grease. If you've got really old-fashioned baking tins at home, you'll probably find they don't need greasing because they'll be well seasoned. So now we're going to shape the loaf. So the way you do this is you pull it to the center from either side, and it will start to go quite sticky, and you go round and round. It's going into quite a long shape. Can you see that cheese and all those lovely herbs coming through? Another nice thing you can put in this actually is paprika if you want to. So pull it round, and your aim is to shape it into a sausage shape. And the seam needs to be underneath at the bottom. And then when you turn it over like that, you've got your loaf ready. Place it in your tin, and then you can just level it out a little bit into your tin, like that. And that now needs to be left to rise, and that needs to double in size. So we're going to pop that just to the side, and you can either lightly cover it, but it will be fine uncovered. And there's our dough, which has now risen. So you can see the difference there, and as it fills the tin and it's risen to double its size. Once it's very soft to touch and it's like a pillow, then you know that it's ready to go in the oven. So you've made your beautiful bread. The hardest bit I think people find is the baking. They can get to this bit and they panic with baking. So make sure your oven is hot. It needs to be at 200 degrees or gas 6, and it needs to be preheated. So once you've got a lovely hot oven, the yeast needs a really high temperature for it actually to have a last burst of life, and then the heat will kill it. But what we need to do is make sure we don't form the crust too quickly on our bread, because if we get a hard crust now, the gases can't expand and we end up with a very dense loaf, which we don't want. So to ensure that doesn't happen, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to dust the bread with a little bit of flour on the top to give it a floury top. You can make a pattern in it if you want. The easiest thing to do really is just use a pair of scissors and snip it. If you've got a sharp knife, you could do it with a knife. And then that's ready to bake. But before I pop it in the oven, I'm going to use some water, because yeast loves moisture. So we need to add some moisture to keep that crust soft, but also to help with feeding the yeast. So you just gently spray a mist over, and then when it goes into the oven, we spray the oven. So I'll be very careful carrying this, because if you knock this, it will knock all the air out. So I'm going to go over to the oven and pop it in the oven, and then spray your oven quite liberally with some moisture just over the bread, and that will just give enough moisture in the oven for it to rise. I'm just now going to take out the cheesy herb loaf that we've been baking. So here is our delicious cheese and herb loaf, which has just come out of the oven, and I just want to show you how to test when it's ready. So you should hear a really lovely hollow sound. So if you tap the top, it should feel crusty, but when you tip it out and take your loaf out, you've got a lovely crusty base underneath. When you tap it, you can hear that lovely hollow sound. So that's our loaf ready. Thank you so much for joining me in making our cheese and herb bread, and good luck with yours.